The great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation is irresistible. The noble cause of peace and development of humanity will prevail. The military parade now begins. Markers in position.
My people, Beijing just rolled out its biggest military parade in a decade. Tanks rumbling through Tiananmen Square, drones buzzing overhead, hypersonic missiles on display, and a front row packed with world leaders: Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un. In total, 26 heads of state showed up. But from Africa, only 2 were present. Now that's a significant decline from the last anniversary parade 10 years ago, where 5 African leaders attended. And that raises a big question. If China and Africa are so close, why did the continent's presence look so thin this time around? Was it Beijing's choice, handpicking just 2 loyal African allies for the spotlight while sidelining the continent? Or was it Africa's choice? Leaders deciding that sitting shoulder to shoulder with Putin and Kim at a military parade was a photo op they didn't want. Today on The Breakdown, we're digging into both possibilities, the optics, and what this moment really says about the state of China-Africa relations. And we're asking a bigger question. When will Africa stop watching others showcase their power and finally start building its own? We're going to break it down, but first, I want to ask you for a quick favor. My people, Black media is in a crisis right now. Our voices are being silenced at a time where it is needed the most. But you can take action to make sure that doesn't happen. Here's how you can support our channel. Number 1, hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell if you haven't already. And number 2, like and comment on this video so YouTube can prioritize our content and push it to more people. And number 3, drop a super thanks or join our membership community to directly support the channel. And finally, before you go, share this video with your group chats and networks to amplify our voice. Thank you so much for rocking with us. Now let's break it down.
Comrade Chairman, the troops for review are fully prepared. Please proceed with the inspection. Chief Commander of the Parade, Han Zhengxuan. Let's begin.
So let's set the stage. On September 3rd, Beijing staged its Victory Day Parade, marking the 80th anniversary of Japan's World War II surrender. It was China's biggest military showcase in a decade. Rows of tanks, columns of troops, long-range missiles, and the latest drones rolling past Tiananmen Square. This wasn't just ceremony. It was a statement of power. And who was in the stands? 26 world leaders, including Xi Jinping's closest partners, Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un, Iran's president, leaders from Central Asia and Southeast Asia. Now, only 2 Western leaders from Serbia and Slovakia attended the parade, with the majority coming from Asia. So Neil Thomas, a fellow on Chinese politics at the Asia Society, shared this data visualization of leaders who attended 10 years ago versus now, and it is telling. So here's what stood out. From Africa, only 2 presidents made the list this year: Zimbabwe's Emerson Mnangagwa and Congo Brazzaville's Denis Sassou Nguesso. Other African nations were represented, but at lower levels. Egypt sent its deputy prime minister. Algeria sent its veterans minister. But no South Africa, no Nigeria, no Kenya, no Ghana, no Ethiopia. So the optics were clear. Africa was there, but not at the top table. And the question is why? Was this Beijing deliberately keeping the African guest list small? Or was it Africa's own leaders deciding not to put themselves in that photo op?
President of the Republic of Zimbabwe, Emerson Mnangagwa. In 2024, President Mnangagwa made a state visit to China and attended the China-Africa Cooperation Forum Summit in Beijing. He did his military training in China in the 1960s and had the deep bond with the Chinese People's Liberation Army. The 2 countries and the 2 parties share similar thoughts.
Next is the President of the Republic of the Congo, Denis Sassou Nguesso. Among African leaders, he is one of those who has made the most visits to China and met with Chinese President Xi Jinping. The 2 heads of state have a deep friendship. The Republic of the Congo is China's ironclad friend. Bilateral ties were upgraded to a comprehensive strategic cooperative partnership in 2016. The 2 countries marked the 60th anniversary of diplomatic ties last year, when President Sassou was in Beijing for a state visit in the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation Summit.
How do we explain it? Well, there are 2 possible ways to read this. Option number 1, that this was Beijing's choice. It's possible that China simply kept the African guest list tight. Why Zimbabwe and Congo Brazzaville? Both are longtime reliable allies. Zimbabwe's Mnangagwa leans heavily on Beijing as Western sanctions squeeze his economy, and Congo's Sassou Nguesso has maintained close ties with China for decades, consistently backing Beijing on the global stage. From Beijing's perspective, inviting these 2 sends a message. Well, loyalty gets rewarded. And remember, this was a military parade, not a trade summit. China may have wanted partners who would show up without hesitation, rather than a large African bloc that could dilute the narrative. Now let's flip the coin for a second. What if this was Africa's choice? Maybe Beijing's invitations went wider, and African leaders themselves just chose to sit this one out. Because think about the optics. Sitting front row next to Putin and Kim Jong-un at a military spectacle, broadcast worldwide. For leaders balancing relationships with the US, Europe, and international financial institutions, that photo op could carry a heavy price. So instead, many may have taken the safer route, right? Sending a minister or deputy instead, or maybe just not showing up at all. Either way, the outcome is the same. Africa was present, but muted. Not absent, but not central. Whether by Beijing's design or Africa's caution, the continent was largely in the background. So what does all of this tell us about China-Africa relations right now? Well, first, the partnership is still strong, but it sends the message that it's not about the military stage. The engine of China-Africa ties has always been trade, infrastructure, and investment. You know, railways, highways, ports, solar panels. That's kind of where the relationship is alive and growing. Military parades, that's not where Africa holds its leverage. Second, Africa is protecting its strategic autonomy, right? Most African leaders just don't want to get locked into the optics of a global bloc. They rely on China for loans, trade, and tech, but they also need Western markets, aid, and partnerships. So showing up at a parade that's dominated by Xi, Putin, and Kim could look like taking sides. And maybe leaders are avoiding that trap. And third, Beijing's priorities were clear. This parade wasn't about Africa. It was about showcasing China's military might to its Eurasian neighbors and to the West. So the spotlight was on Russia, North Korea, Iran, and Central Asia. Africa was shut out, but it wasn't the star of the show either. So the muted African presence doesn't mean that ties are weakening. It just means that China and Africa are keeping their partnership focused where it's strongest and perhaps where they want it to remain. Economics, not military optics. So then, my people, we gotta ask, if Africa isn't seen as a military player by China, or if it isn't interested in building military cooperation and partnership with China, and the US is also stepping back its military presence on the continent at the same time, where does that leave us? Right now, it leaves Africa in a dangerous middle ground. Terror groups are spreading in the Sahel. Instability is rising in the Horn of Africa. Piracy in the Gulf of Guinea, coups from West to Central Asia, foreign mercenaries filling the gaps. The threats are real, but the world's big powers aren't rushing in. And maybe that's the wake-up call. Because if China doesn't spotlight Africa on the military stage, and America is pulling out, then Africa has two options. Keep outsourcing its security to whoever steps in next, as it is right now with Russia, let's be honest. Or, and I like this option better, it can finally build its own collective security capacity through African institutions, African troops, and African cooperation. And here's the kicker. Africa doesn't need to mirror Beijing's tanks and missiles to be taken seriously. What it needs is just regional strength, well-trained forces, modern equipment, and above all, the political will to stand together. Think ECOWAS, but actually walking its talk. Think AU peacekeeping with teeth. Think Africa funding its own defense instead of waiting for outside donors. Because here's the truth. If Africa wants to stop being a backdrop in someone else's military parade, it has to step into the stage as its own security guarantor, not as a pawn in the US-China rivalry, but as a player in its own right. So the muted presence in Beijing isn't just about who sat in the stands. It's a reminder of a bigger question. Will Africa keep watching others rise, showcase their power? Or will we finally start building our own? So where do we go from here, my people? China's parade was revealing, and it has showed us something bigger than tanks and missiles. It showed us exactly where Africa stands. Not front row, not center stage, just a muted presence in the background. Whether that was Beijing's choice or Africa's own decision, the message is the same. If Africa wants to be seen as a serious player, it has to build that power for itself, so that it can get invited to the tables, because no one else is going to hand it over. So, my people, what do you think? Was Beijing deliberately limiting Africa's presence? Or do you think this was Africa's decision to stay out? And if so, was it a good move? And bigger than that, do you think Africa can ever become a true military power on its own terms? And what is that going to take? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let's talk about it. You know, I'll be reading all of them. And if this episode gave you something to think about, don't just keep it to yourself, share it widely, and let's have the conversation together. Thank you so much for watching. Once again, I'm Sandra Babu-Boateng, and until next time, take care.